Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Andrew Sean Greer is the author of Less is Lost. This is guest hosted by Alisha Fernandez Miranda, who hosts the podcast Quit Your Day Job and is one of the Zibby Books authors with an upcoming memoir called My What If Year. Andrew Sean Greer is the author of 7 works of fiction, including the bestsellers The Confessions of Max Tivoli and Less. Greer has taught at a number of universities, including Stanford and the Iowa Writers Workshop. He's been a Today Show pick, a New York Public Library Coleman Center Fellow, a judge for the National Book Award, and a winner of the California Book Award and the New York Library Young Lions Award. He is the recipient of an NEA grant, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. He lives in San Francisco and Milan. His latest novel, Less is Lost, is what we're talking about.
All right, guys. Well, I'm really excited to be back here on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books and to welcome Andrew Sean Greer, who is the author of Less is Lost. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're smiling really nicely at me, but I'm kind of angry at you because I didn't sleep last night. I was flying back from New York. I started your book on the tarmac, and I did not stop reading until my layover at 6 o'clock this morning in Dublin. So thank you / I'm angry at you for writing such a phenomenal and hilarious book.
You have no one to blame but yourself.
That's absolutely true.
Planes are good for reading. Yeah, planes are good for reading. You know, I have to say that's one of the best things about a plane.
I loved reading a book about traveling while I was traveling, even though I was leaving America and not kind of traveling around America in an RV. But it was a delight. I'm a big fan of Less, but also you really reward the reader who's paying attention. And I think I appreciate that when I see something come back and I'm like, I remember that joke. He said that a few pages ago. That's also the good thing about reading a book in one sitting. So,
that is great to hear. Because if you read it over weeks, those things don't really land. Yeah.
But even if you do, you'll still love it because we know we got a lot of busy moms listening to this podcast who may not have very long flights. But why don't you start by telling everybody what Less is Lost is about?
Less is Lost. It's a follow-up to Less, but it's a standalone. Don't be scared. There's not much to know about the first book. It's not like it has a lot of plot, but it's a story about a middle-aged, middle career gay writer in America who's living in San Francisco with his boyfriend, Freddie, and it's narrated by Freddie. And there's a financial crisis, and Les has to go and try to get as much money as he can from the weirdo things that writers are offered. And he ends up in a kind of cross-country trip, west to east, in the United States. And it's Freddie who's telling the story with love, affection, and ridicule of his boyfriend.
The narrator's voice is so strong, but also the characterization of Les is so strong as well. And I think you really strike that balance so brilliantly. So I know you've answered this. I've gone through and did like a deep dive rabbit hole of reading a lot of the press you've done around this book. But I think it's worth asking again, what made you decide you wanted to come back to this story after such a successful run with Les?
Well, you probably read that I didn't at first. I have to say I was, because books in the U.S., they come out a year after you turn them in. So I was fiddling around with more stories about Les because it's just really enjoyable for me. And then my agent told me, you've won the Pulitzer Prize. You can't write a sequel to a Pulitzer Prize novel. It's unseemly. But I didn't. I worked on another book for a long time and I read it and it was awful.
Oh, God.
I mean, that's not atypical for me. I'm very hard on myself, but it was bad. And I remembered something another prize winner had told me, Michael Chabon. He said, now you can write anything you want. And I thought, okay, then I'm going to write a sequel to Less, because that's, my comfort zone. It was such a joy to write that way.
Timeline-wise, when were you writing this? Was this before March 2020? Was it during the pandemic? Kind of what was your timeline when you were actually putting this together?
I did the research for the book I was going to write. I didn't know what it was much earlier.
Okay.
Right after the 2016 election.
Oh,
so
wow.
2017, before Less even came out in the US, I rented a camper van and went to the Southwest and the Deep South for 6 weeks. And so I started writing in 2019, the bad book. And then I started Less just before the pandemic. And this is the book that I wrote in the pandemic, but I had all the material.
Right.
And so I just was locked in a room in Milan.
Yeah, I mean, but like actually locked in a room, because I know Italy had a very restrictive lockdown.
Oh yeah, there's no leaving. It was great. They would make rules that would be like, for Christmas, like you have to choose for 10 days where you're going to be and you can't go to the next town. The next town is like across the street. I mean, those towns are just right up next to each other. So, of course, my boyfriend and I chose to spend those 10 days with his parents.
Of course he did.
10 days.
Oh, wow.
And we don't speak English. Yeah, it was great.
How's your Italian?
It's gotten better since then.
Is it as good as your German? Because I have to say, those parts... the German parts of the book, like the stewardess came over to ask if I was okay, because I was like actually laughing.
I'm sorry. I just think it's funny to think, I mean, as English speakers, we take it for granted that other people would learn English as their second or third or fourth language. When you go to a hotel in France and France is a bad example, in Spain, and they speak English and then they speak French to the next person. And you're like, this person would be an ambassador in the United States.
Yes.
And here they work at a hotel. And we should have a little humility about how ridiculous we would sound.
We do. And my French is definitely much worse than Les's German in the book. Okay, so I'm like fascinated by the fact that you actually took this RV trip and that was your research. Tell us a little bit about the trip, and did you pull from, I know it's fiction, but did you pull from any actual experiences you had on the road?
Well, I had a rule my rule in Less. I had two rules. Mm-hmm. One was I could only write down details that I wrote down in my notebook for my travels.
Ooh, okay.
So everything in Less, those things did not happen to those people, but every rock and chair is real, because I didn't want to write a fantasy of India or Japan. I wanted to write what was actually there. And the second one is that the joke is always on Arthur Less. When you travel, those people are normal. And if you can't figure out the subway system, it's not because they're stupid. It's because you are.
Yeah.
So which is, I can never figure out subway systems. So I did the same one in this book. I thought, I'm not going to make fun of Arizona, Alabama, Mississippi, but I'm going to write down all the details that I'll need, because I have my preconceptions about those parts of the country. And I'm not allowed to write those preconceptions down. Right. I have to write down what there is. There was a hound dog cemetery. There was a tombstone that said he was not the best, but he was the best I ever had. I wrote that down, and it made it into the book in a major way.
I feel like there's going to be a slew of people doing RV trips, like trying to follow the same route. I would do it. I would do it in a heartbeat. I did travel a lot more than Less does. I went all over the place. I just went to tiny, small towns everywhere. I went to Greer, New Mexico, just because it was named Greer. It turned out to be a ski resort. And I was trapped in a blizzard in a bar and just talked to everyone there. Oh, how amazing. Were you on your own, or were you traveling with your partner?
My partner was with me at the first part because he hasn't seen a lot of America. He's Italian. And so I took him through the sort of communes of the Southwest, which I combined into something. He was fascinated. But I realized it's better if I travel alone. I pay more attention to what's around me. If I'm with someone else, I just talk with them. So in the South, Deep South, I was definitely alone, which was helpful.
Yeah. It's such a journey. So I want to read this quote that I pulled out. I could have basically just read the whole book here as an audiobook, but I'm not going to do that. I pulled out this one. He thinks each day will be better than the next. He is wrong. He awakens the next morning and thinks it again. He is wrong. He thinks we are free to become our true selves, that we are free to love as we choose. A mindset so United Statesian, you could serve it with ketchup. But friends, you cannot live on ketchup, which I just loved that. And in the piece that the New York Times did about you, you said you really wanted to write about America. Why?
Well, I had, in that 2016 election, I think a lot of America, no matter what you felt about the outcome, was surprised and interested in it. And now we see even more and more a divided America. And I, as a novelist, politically, I have firm ideas, but as a novelist, I don't. I go in thinking, maybe I'm wrong. I clearly am ignorant. So I thought I want to see America that I had never visited before. And I want to try to put it in my head to write a book about America, which is such a pompous thing to say. And of course, in my mind, I was going to write this 800-page tome about travel. And it ends up being a silly and poignant novel about a small part of it. But I put it in my head. And at the beginning of the book, there's a foreigner, a Czech writer, who asks Arthur, he says, why do Americans never ask themselves, what if America is a bad idea? And we don't ask ourselves that until very recently.
I've been an expat, I guess, for a long time. I've been 15 years out of the U.S. in the U.K. And I was at the Deauville Women's Summit in France in 2016, right after Trump got elected, in this room full of, feminists from around Europe and the world, and just everybody kind of in shock. And I remember there was a panel of American women talking about the election, and a French woman stood up and asked this question. She was like, doesn't this now prove that everything, something like, doesn't this now prove that everything you've ever been trying to do as America has just been like charade and you were all wrong all along? And it was amazing, actually, because the panel really they were like, no, absolutely not. It just means we need to fight harder and we need to do more. And that's such a uniquely American point of view. But being an expat, have you seen a different side of that? And how do you feel like your perception of America has changed? I know you spent a lot of time out of the country.
I think it's really useful. It gives you a perspective of, well, for instance, if I'm here in San Francisco, my super liberal friends get very upset and want to talk about what Marjorie Taylor Greene said yesterday. And when I'm in Italy, no one knows who that is.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
That is not in the newspaper. And you realize that person is of no importance. Yeah. She has a minor vote in the House of Representatives. And why would you listen to that person? Italy has its own Marjorie Taylor Greene, sort of loudmouth people, and plenty of them. And I could read about them, but Americans don't know them. And you start to see there's a lot of news cycle we're reading that isn't important. And I do see the rest of the world. I mean, Italy, they love America and American things because of what after the war, it transformed the country, the presence of Americans.
Right.
And they can't let go of that, really. I think it's heartbreaking in Italy for them to see the country heading the way it's heading. And they just had their own election.
That's right.
That didn't go the way. None of us were surprised, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's been around a long time. It was no surprise. But I think it broke their hearts to think that this solid thing they've seen in movies might be, mom and papa are fighting feeling.
Well, it is this, and I think you do this, you bring this up in so many different ways in the scenes in your book, that this idea of America goes far beyond America. I think it's how it's not just how Americans think of themselves, but there's also this sort of perception that other people have around the world of what America is. And it's important to people, not as important, I think, as often Americans would like to think it is, but it is important to a lot of people. And it's changing so rapidly. And I loved how really kind of sympathetic and humanized you were to your characters, and how they were real defined people. And it was not a caricature of people in the South, and it was not it was really beautifully handled. So you did a very good job with that, I think.
Thanks. I think, and that word in there, United Statesian, is from Italy, because they're always like, why do you call yourselves America? There's so many other parts of America. And they don't say American, they say Stati,
Yeah, same in Spanish.
It's United States.
Exactly.
Yeah. And which I think is really funny. It's just an awkward word in English.
But I might start using it.
And my partner does always make fun of me. He always says, I'm going to have catch up with that because that's so disgusting to them.
Oh my gosh. So your writing process, you wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. You've now come back. Do you feel kind of more confident in your writing? Has your writing process changed? Has the process of trying to sell this book changed kind of since everything that's happened since Less come out? Tell me how things are different than they were then.
Certainly easier to sell the book. Because Less, I had trouble selling that in the UK. 12 different publishers, including my old publisher, all turned it down. I was let loose and it wasn't going to come out until the day after I won that prize. And
oh my God.
It was easier. So I'm very aware that I should have a little humility about it. Nobody wanted that book.
Don't. You need to go like Julia Roberts back into all those publishers. Like you made a big mistake.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Huge. But as you guessed, the biggest transformation is in me and in a sense of confidence of like, okay, I will write this other book. And maybe no one's asking for it, but I'm allowed to now. Mm-hmm. Whereas before I would that's a good way to write a book.
Yeah,
is to think, this is what I want to write, not this is what's going to sell. And I think some interviews, they think it's cynical of me to write a sequel to Less. And I'm like, oh, no. Everyone told me not to.
Yeah, I did it anyway.
It was uncynical. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember when I finished Less, which was a while ago, I read it when it came out, that I really did want more. So sometimes you're really grateful to come back into the world, and especially in a way where it's like good. It's not like a reboot that happens 20 years later and you're like, oh God, I wish they would have just left well enough alone.
I mean, I hope, because part of it was that I needed to be in a sort of warmer embrace during pandemic. And so I hope the book is like that. Because like for me, not to denigrate other art forms, but like I loved Game of Thrones, but I turned to the new one. I'm like, I cannot be here.
Same.
This is too dark.
Same.
Give me
I know.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
I need something a little light, but this was light, but it was also smart, so I really enjoyed it. As obviously I've been like gushing all over this entire podcast. They're gonna have to cut some of this out so I don't seem too fangirly. Keep it all. You do a lot of the fantastic jokes in the book that do come at the expense of Less are also at the expense of the publishing community, the writing community, the literary community as a whole. Do you find it harder or maybe easier to satirize the community now that you are Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, Andrew Sean Greer?
It must be easier because I if anyone gets mad at me, I'm not worried like, oh no, now I won't be invited to that cocktail party where I might, I don't want to go to a cocktail party anymore. I don't need that.
That's so awesome. So what are you reading right now?
I just bought a huge stack of books and a friend gave me a whole bunch. So I am finishing. I'm a big fan of Muriel Spark. Mm-hmm. I just think like there's a Muriel Spark novel for everyone. So I'm finishing one that's called The Only Problem, which is nuts, as they all are.
Nice.
And I think next up, I've got Karen Joy Fowler's novel Booth. I always love her books. She's also like Muriel Spark. Everyone's different, but they're all so smart and lovely.
Yeah.
And I've got to read the new Emily St. John Mandel, and I've got to read a Sheila Heti book. And
your list is as long as mine.
And I'm a slow reader. That's the terrible thing. I'm really slow.
No, but that means you're enjoying every word, which I think writers probably appreciate. So. And what's next for you in terms of your writing or other projects?
It is about time for me to get back to this novel that I started this summer. Okay,
the one you put away.
No. Well, the one not that one.
Oh, that one's gone. That one's in the drawer forever.
That one's gone forever. Okay. I cannibalized it for Less is Lost. No, this next one is not a book with Arthur Less, but it is because I base it on the material that I have because I'm sort of a researcher, even though it doesn't seem like it. And my material is Italy.
Oh, okay.
So I have a book there, but in the same sort of warm-hearted comic mode, but with different characters.
Excellent. Well, sign me up for a pre-order. I'll be right there. So I have a podcast with Zibby's Network. It's called Quit Your Day Job. So I have a particular fascination in jobs and career changers. And I read this about you, that you have been a chauffeur a restaurant receptionist, an extra on Saturday Night Live. You worked for Nintendo. You were a paralegal. You worked at a toy company. What was like the best and the worst of all of those jobs that you have done?
I would say working for Nintendo was great because my job was to play the games until I won them. I was paid to do that, and then write an article about tricks on how to beat the game. And that just seems like a dream job. And like,
we should have had a warning, like, moms, if your kids are in the car, turn this off, because if they hear that that's a job, you're never getting them back.
And I think naming toys for a toy company was pretty hilarious too. Like that they would pay me to do that. They paid me hours, and they told me, like, you're charging us too little. You need to double the hours. And I'm like, but it's easy. And then I realized, oh, it's easy for me.
Do you remember anything you named?
Well, they would never take my real names.
Oh.
That's the thing. I remember that there was a pool floating radio. This is like 2000, so that seemed really cool. Mm-hmm. And I called it the Sound Turtle. I was like, that's charming.
I'd buy that.
Yeah, I give it to the marketing people and they pitch it in a meeting. I give them like 3. And they always would choose something like floating pool radio. Every time. I don't care. You know,
you did your thing. I don't know if you saw Tick, Tick, Boom. There was a great part of Tick, Tick, Boom where they're trying to come up with ideas. Did you see Tick, Tick, Boom?
I did. It was great.
Yeah. And then, you know, that scene when they're in the office and he's like trying to brainstorm ideas about what to name this product that they need. No, so funny. I love that that's a real job that people get paid to do.
Yes.
What was the worst of all of those job experiences?
I think being a restaurant reservationist was really awful because I was in New York City. It was a really chic restaurant at the time. And I had to somehow at the age of 21 know the names of every downtown person who should be able to get in.
Oh, God.
And put them at tables at different times. And I was bad at it. One day I came in and the chef came upstairs with a cleaver wanting to kill me. I took everyone at 7:30.
Oh, my God.
What did I know?
Well, everything's copy, right? That probably makes it into a good story at some point.
Yeah.
We always like to kind of finish up here with what your advice would be to aspiring writers who are listening to this.
Well, part of it's the day job thing. I think don't get a day job that is all writing all day because you'll be worn out. And someone gave me that advice when I was really young. And as you can see, I took it. And I think it was really useful because then that 1 hour that you can grab for yourself every evening goes into the writing instead of being like, I can't look at the screen for another minute or pad of paper. In fact, pad of paper might be a good way to write. If you're tired of screens, it might feel like a different magic object.
Yeah, use a different part of your brain, I think, when you writing by hand.
Plenty of people write on yellow legal pad.
This has been such an amazing conversation. Where can listeners find you online for more information about what you're up to and your whereabouts and all of those exciting things?
Oh, I got an old-fashioned website.
Nice.
AndrewGreer.com, which I bought in 1998, and I still run myself.
That's fabulous. I go on a domain buying spree a lot of the time. I've never bought that one. You had it already, so I couldn't.
But I think Instagram is the other way to write to me. That's what I'll answer. Yeah.
And what's your handle?
A.S. Greer.
Amazing. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being on the podcast and for writing such a beautiful book that was worth staying up all night to read. So I am grateful for that.
Thank you for doing that and for having me on.
Les should have known at the clinic a few weeks before that his relationship was in some trouble. It was an ordinary blood draw for an ordinary medical checkup, the kind a man over 50 must submit to once a year in America. The bell jingled as he opened the clinic door, then jingled again as he failed to close it, then jingled again. And again. "Sorry," he shouted to the empty waiting room. "Its only inhabitants, a clipboard, a water cooler, and a fan of gossip magazines in absurd hues. But look at Les. A sweatshirt as bright as a highlighter, a little Marseillais fisherman's hat. Let's not anyone here call anyone else absurd." In the exam room, the phlebotomist, bald, Taiwanese, heavily tattooed, suffering a fresh heartbreak that has no bearing on our story, arrived with a clipboard which he handed to Arthur Les. "Please write your full name at the top," the phlebotomist said, preparing an intriguing tray of vials. The patient wrote the name Arthur Les. Please write down the name of your emergency contact, the phlebotomist said, preparing the inflatable cuff. The patient wrote the name Freddie Pelou. Please write down the nature of your relationship, the phlebotomist said. The patient looked up with surprise. Our lovelorn phlebotomist glanced at the questionnaire and replaced the blood pressure cuff with its kelp-like tubing and bulb on the tray beside him. Such a device is called, by the way, a manometer. The nature of your relationship, Mr. Less, he said brusquely. It's a tough question, said the patient. Pausing for a moment, misunderstanding the universe, he finally wrote, uncertain. This clumsiness of the heart also became apparent on a certain California road trip. Les was equipped only with his lover, an old Saab, and some hastily purchased camping equipment consisting of 2 intra-zipping sleeping bags and a large nylon disc. This disc, of Swiss manufacture, unfolded into a tent whose vast interior defied belief. Les was fascinated by its pockets, air vents, rain flies, its stitching, netting, and circular Guggenheim ceiling. But, like the Swiss, it was neutral. It did not love him back. Sure of his infallibility, he unzipped the insect mesh and let in a rowdy bachelorette party of mosquitoes that raided the human open bar. He even zipped the sleeping bags to the ceiling. And on the final day, when a wild downpour arrived at lunchtime, it was decided that, while the tent could be trusted, Les himself could not. A hotel must be booked. The nearest was something called Hotel d'Amour. This turned out to be a cream-colored cake in a rain-drenched forest, decorated inside with white roses and gilt furniture, and the desk clerk greeted them with surprise and delight. There were no guests at the hotel due to the last-minute cancellation of a wedding. We've got a rose altar and a priest and a wedding dinner and cake and champagne and a DJ and everything. She sighed, and her fellow staff members looked upon their new guests expectantly. Doves within a cage cooed romantically. The stout priest, her vestments dark with rain, smiled hopefully. A string quartet was playing Anything Goes. Outside, the storm shut the door and blocked the escape. It seemed there was no dodging destiny. What do you think? I said to Arthur Less. That's me. I am Freddie Pelou. I am the emergency contact who picked up Les at the blood draw clinic shortly after he fainted. I am a short and slight man approaching 40, the age at which the charming eccentricities of one's 20s, sleeping in a silk bonnet to save my curls and wearing rabbit-eared slippers, become the zaniness of middle age. My curls have patinaed like scallops on old silver. My red glasses magnify my myopia. I am winded after chasing my dog one time around the park. But I am as yet unwrinkled. I am no Arthur Less. Rather, I am what I would call an alloy, and my grandmother would call a pasticcio, of Italian, Spanish, and Mexican heritages, mere nationalities being themselves mixtures of Iberian, indigenous, African, Arab, and Frankish migrations, breaking down further until we get to the elemental humans from whom we all descend.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.